Namaste, hello everyone. Welcome back to my course, the online NPTEL course on role of craft and technology in interior architecture. We are heading towards the module 6. So, module 6 focuses on establishing the importance of documenting knowledge and skills within the realm of interior architecture. The broad contents for today's module: interior architecture, documenting knowledge and skills, where we will have some examples and we will have discussions over them, and then some important references which would be beneficial for all of you. Now, if we talk about interior architecture, like any other discipline or field, say medicine, sciences or fine arts, interior architecture also has a huge knowledge base and resources. If we see different regions of the country and different parts of the world, different communities, they have all practiced different styles of interior architecture which have evolved out of their needs, climate concerns, their way of life, and material knowledge, skills that they possess. So, there already is a knowledge base and there are several resources. At times we find them documented, at times we find paucity of this documentation. So, the importance of this module is that we are trying to understand why this documentation is required and how it is important for all of us. So, since the knowledge base already exists and there are several other resources which have not been tapped, which have not been documented, the emphasis here is on creating this resource hub through documentation, documenting the knowledge and skills which are very crucial, which are very empirical and important, which have been collated through experiences and generations of wisdom. Then how to transfer it to the other generations, next generations, contemporary generations, and then how to share it and take this knowledge forward. In a literal sense, if we talk about documentation, then it refers to an act or instance of authenticating with documents. It is essentially a process of ensuring conformity to historical facts. But if I focus a little bit on interior architecture here, which is the primary focus of our module and this course also, everything may not be proved through the facts or theoretical constructs. Sometimes it's not possible. But empirical knowledge and skills, these are the crucial repositories which we can fall back upon. So, there are a lot of oral traditions, there are a lot of knowledge systems which have been practiced, but there is no documentation. So, there is no particular book or particular theory or particular documentation report which can be really looked into or referenced to. So, here what I am trying to say is that lot of these untapped knowledge base and skills, they need to be understood while observing the community, and then slowly the generations like ours and the generations to come understand them, document them, and then share them. Recognition and documentation of knowledge, skills and practices associated with interior architecture, especially within the context of India, is an important step towards resource building and knowledge sharing. Such documentation proves that knowledge has existed in the communities, personal or particular areas. So, it is very important that we focus on documentation and try to understand and learn these existing knowledge systems, knowledge bases and skills. This is one drawing. Here it is an image. This is some documentation work which is done by the Rachna Academy of Architecture, and they had taken up a settlement in Almora which is called Cheena Khan. It is a very old settlement and they have a very unique pattern because the site is on hills, there are contours over there. So, the way it is constructed, responding to the site conditions and the contour levels and the lifestyle of people, the way it has been designed, it was very interesting to study this, understand this and document. So, already one set of documentation is done. Now, there is another project at IIT Roorkee which is going on, where further documentation taking the base work which has already been done is going on. So, here while documenting this, there was lot of knowledge sharing, there was lot of understanding on how this community in those times, in a context like this, in a hilly area like this, where there is susceptibility to earthquakes and there are adverse climate conditions, how these kind of settlements came up. Majorly, most importantly, in response to the way of life and the way the people live there. So, after that, as part of the ongoing project, these are some sketches or some drawings which were done on the site. There was a lot of observations that happened on site. There were a lot of interviews and people were talked about. This is another set of data that was generated, and we were also trying to understand in local parlance what are the elements of space making called there, what is a door called there, what is a courtyard called there. So I am not getting into the details of that documentation right now. Maybe when we focus on Uttarakhand as our case study area, then we will have a look at those. But what I am trying to say is that documentation is an essential part of understanding the existing knowledge and skills which these communities possess, and they have been transferring them from one generation to another. This is another residence in Khajanchi Mohalla, which is again in Almora. Now this is a very exquisitely carved facade. It is in timber, the local wood which was available at that time, called tun, which has excellent material properties. It's a 300 years old residence. It is still in a very good condition because the kind of material used and the kind of knowledge that the local masons and the artisans had, they have applied it here with full purity and in complete accordance with the lifestyle of the people. So it was very interesting for us to document this house and to understand what are the spaces that lie within this facade and what are the different motives and meanings behind this elevation and the stories that it tells us. So this was an important part of documentation. So documentation is not just creating a set of drawings, but also understanding the associated meanings and the way people live and the cumulative experiences over generations and the wisdom. So this is the elevation. We just saw the drawing. So by documenting such unique architectural styles, interior architectural styles, we are creating repositories and resource hubs which will be very beneficial for the times to come to understand the material palette which was used in these times. I mean, what was so unique about them that this house still stands and the condition is fairly intact and the aesthetics are still quite intact, and we see a lot of scale and proportion which is like beautifully done, which we see sometimes missing in the contemporary buildings. Not all, but few of them. Now this is another example of documentation. These are residences in the Uttarkashi region of Uttarakhand, and they are constructed in a very unique style which is called as the Koti Banal style of architecture. It's a very indigenous style responding to the climatic conditions and the earthquake resistance. If we see these residences, they also have very unique wood carving, and they are done by the local masons, the indigenous community, artisans. All of them come together and construct these houses. So this is again a very interesting example where while documenting and talking to these people, we could understand a lot of nitty-gritties of what kind of construction happens and how this carving happens, and what are the integral parts of this cluster where the temple is situated and where the houses are situated. So documentation and talking to the people, trying to understand the local parlance and materials, it always helps us understand the habitation and environment better and how these constructions happened in harmony with nature. So if we go by Dr. Yashodhar Matpal's several researches, what we understand is that we can see exquisite woodwork in Uttarakhand, both in Garhwal region and the Kumaon region, and there is an abundance of timber, and the temperature over there is suitable for insulation. There is availability of local skilled craft persons. There are family traditions which have been passed on from one generation to another. So all of this has contributed in this kind of craft and construction and interior architecture. So he has also made a small contribution by, in fact a huge contribution, by documenting all these residences in Garhwal and Kumaon, and he has done a base work which the scholars like us are carrying forward. So there are historical evidences also which support the presence of intricate wood carvings in Uttarakhand. So if we see the houses in Uttarakhand, wood carving has formed a very innate part of interior architecture. So it's not just a piece of decoration or aesthetics, but how these carvings, the motifs and the meanings associated with them are an integral part of the lifestyle of the people and the interior architecture which they live in. So if we see the entire woodworks of the frames and the windows, the local parlance for a 3-paneled window here, it's very interesting. It is called Tibari. They are now on display in the National Museum of Delhi. So such is the importance of documenting these old knowledges, bases, their skills and the important meanings that they have. Utility and decorative items like walking sticks, animal figures, miniature models, idols of gods, etc., also made by the craft persons in Uttarakhand, they have also acquired a special place. So intricate woodcrafts have been seen in many residential and religious structures as well. So documentation which has already been done suggests that there is a very exquisite woodcraft that is found in this region, and there are several structures and products which still need documentation, dissemination and sharing. Here what you can see is Mr. Diwan, who is demonstrating the wood carving craft. He belongs to the Diwan community of wood carving craft persons, and while I was talking to him, he was telling how the traditions have transferred from one generation to another. So from his grandfather, who he fondly calls as Bubuji, and then it got transferred to his father Babaji, and then he is the 3rd generation and he is still carrying forward these knowledge and skills. So the different kinds of tools that are being used and what kind of carvings are done in this region. So we'll see few videos where he explains everything. Also, what is the importance of wood carving in this region, and he is very proud to say that nowhere else in India such kind of wood carving exists, and it's only in Uttarakhand, and he talks about the uniqueness of this craft and the knowledge and the skills. So let us see some videos now.
कोई यहाँ वैसे तब जो हमारी ये पुरातत्व में जो हमारी ज़रूरत पड़ी ना, उन लोगों को हमारे बूबू के उसने बताया, हाँ बूबू जी ने बनाई थी वो छत। उसके बाद फिर बूबू जी मरे तो पिताजी ने बनाई। उसके बाद जब पिताजी मरे तो लास्ट में जब छत ख़राब हो गई फिर हमारी ज़रूरत पड़ी। उन्होंने कहा जिसने ये बनाए रखा उसी का चाहिए हमको। हाँ
गुड मॉर्निंग। आपके लिए चेयर लगा रखी है।
अलग अलग तरह की लिखाई काम का भी कुछ नाम है क्या? जैसे कम गहरा, ज़्यादा गहरा,
हाँ।
उन्हें कुछ बोलते हैं?
हाँ,
कैसे बोलते हैं?
जैसे हमारे यहाँ बड्डी बनती है ना, ये एक तो 1.25 इंची में लग जाएगा, एक लगेगा आधा इंची में, एक लगेगा 1 इंची।
तो उन्हें कुछ बोलते भी हैं?
हाँ,
क्या?
उसको कहते हैं हम खोपाई की गहराई। जो खोपाई होती है उसकी गहराई बोलते हैं उसको। हाँ, एक तो है आधा इंची, एक है 1 इंची, और ज़्यादा कढ़ाई वाली है 1.5 इंची, ज़्यादा गहरा। भाई ये लास्ट पॉइंट है 1.5 इंची वाला। हाँ भाई 1.5 इंची, इसमें जो ये निकाल रखा है ये 1.5 इंची में पूरा निकल जाएगा गहराई तक। इसमें तो औसत अभी है
तो
नहीं।
1.5 इंची की गहराई निकालने के लिए कम से कम कितनी लकड़ी चाहिए? 3 इंच?
3 इंची। हाँ 3 इंची फालतू रहेगी वो।
तो मंदिरों में जो आप करते हैं वो ये ये 1.5 इंच वाली होती है
भाई
या सब
1.5 इंच
मिली जुली होती है?
हाँ, उसमें 1.5, 3, 4, 5 जो बेल्ट होते हैं बीच में हमको 5 के डालते हैं। बेल्ट में भी कढ़ाई आ जाती है किसी
5 इंच गहरी
हाँ,
होती है वो?
हाँ फिर बेल्ट में भी कढ़ाई आ जाती है। जो बेल्ट हमारे सीधे पड़ गई ना, ये सीधे बेल्ट पड़, बेल्ट के दोनों तरफ कढ़ाई आएगी।
तो 5 इंच गहरी होती है?
हाँ,
तो लकड़ी कितनी मोटी होगी?
इस तरह उसकी होती तुम्हारी 6 इंची।
6 इंच लकड़ी
हाँ।
होगी और उसमें 5 इंच की गहराई काम
5
होगा।
इंच हाँ।
पर दोनों तरफ बोल रहे हैं आप?
हाँ फिर इस तरफ से भी होगी, इस तरफ से होगी। 1.5 इंची इधर से होगा, 1.5 इंची इधर से। 5 इंची मोटाई ठहरी ना उसकी।
अच्छा।
हाँ, एक ही तरफ से 3 इंची में घट जाएगी लकड़ी।
हाँ।
दोनों तरफ से बराबर कढ़ाई आएगी, इस तरफ से भी इस तरफ से भी। 5 इंची में।
जो छोटे वाले औजार होते हैं उनको क्या बोलते हैं? ये टिबारी वगैरह से?
हाँ हाँ हाँ, उसको बोलते हैं गोल निहणी।
क्या?
गोल वाली निहणी, जो
निहणी।
गोलिंग। हाँ
निहणी।
निहणी।
कितनी आप उसको क्या बोलते हो? सूत बोलते हो?
हाँ, आधा सूत।
आधा सूत।
हाँ,
और कौन सा?
और एक पतीसी लगती है इसमें 1.25 इंची वाली।
पतीसी?
हाँ, पतीसी।
उससे क्या होता है?
1.25 इंची वाली, इससे कम चौड़ी होती है वो। हाँ, वो खोपाई वो वाली
खुपाई के
हाँ।
लिए। अच्छा।
और एक होता है राफा, रम्फी।
राफा?
हाँ राफा।
और रम्पी क्या?
हाँ, राफा वही ठहरा।
उसी को बोलते
हाँ
हैं?
उसी को।
अच्छा, उससे?
हाँ, वो राफा जो है ये कोनों में कढ़ाई निकालती है। कोनी जो गोल
कोने में?
हाँ, कोने में काम करता है।
अच्छा।
हाँ, इसके बाद ये साइड वाला रंधा होता है।
साइड वाला
हाँ।
रंधा। अच्छा।
वो भी कढ़ाई वाला होता है।
वो कढ़ाई के लिए?
हाँ, वो कढ़ाई के लिए।
अच्छा।
हाँ।
और?
So through this documentation and interviewing Diwanji and many other people from his community, also going through the researches done by a lot of scholars in Uttarakhand, especially Dr. Matpal, we could know that the indigenous wood which is best suited for carving is tun. Now it's a very old kind of naturally available wood which is found in Uttarakhand, and now it's a rare commodity. It's been declared as a protected wood. So if we see very old houses, say 100 years old, 200 years old, we still see the traces of work which is done in tun, and it's of such good quality that those carvings and houses, furniture, they still exist. The second wood which is adequate for this construction and ornamentation is deodar, and there are several deodar trees, but because of strict forest laws, now even this is not used as much as it was, and is not very easily available. And the third common one would be the pine wood, which is called in local parlance as chir. The use of indigenous pine is getting replaced by the imported pine. So now, because of strict forest laws, the imported pine is taking place of the locally available pine. But the indigenous woods like tun, deodar and then chir, they have proved to be timeless. We see them being used in construction, ornamentation, everywhere. So out of documentation and by observations, going on site, talking to people, some oral narratives, only through all that this repository has been accumulated. So it's very important to give emphasis on documentation of knowledge and skills. This is again the same house we just saw from the outside. This is the interior, and we see another kind of intricate artwork here which is called as the apen art, and this is done by the women of the house, and these paintings are original and they are 55 years old. So if we see all these paintings, we find several motifs, we find several floral motifs, geometric motifs, we find god motifs, we find symbolic motifs like tree of life. So all of these enhance the interior architecture, and they also have several embedded meanings within them. which communicate a lot of stories about all these indigenous communities, and they narrate their ethos and the way they used to live. So through this documentation, those stories still survive and tell us a lot about the way of life of people and what went on in that era. This was one interesting research that I could find, where the original motifs from Kumaoni Apan art have been documented. So if we see all of these, they all talk about nature, religion, society. So if we see, Vishnu Chauki or some Chauki related to Lord Shiva, we see here sun god, we see the motifs from the trees, the bales and the flowers. So they all are associated with our daily lives. This is another one from the same research paper, and here also the original motifs have been researched upon and talked about. So when we see them, there are several stories, and when these kinds of stories are depicted within the interior architecture, it creates another user experience and it becomes very divine. So to understand also, other than the structure, what goes on the surface and what are the narratives that are communicated through them is also of paramount importance. So as Taylor has also said, culture is an historically transmitted pattern of meanings embodied in symbols, a system of inherited conceptions expressed in symbolic forms by means of which people communicate, perpetuate and develop their knowledge about and attitudes towards life. So all these meanings and symbols that we see within the interior architecture, they communicate a lot. They tell about the life of people who inhabit them. In continuation to what we saw in few residences just talked about in last few slides, there was one national workshop that happened in IIT Roorkee. It is called Dharohar. It's a part of Project Dharohar. So there the indigenous artisans and craftspersons and masons were invited, and their skills and knowledge was documented. So this is some work done by the students, and it documents step by step, what were the particular materials that were used in these art and craft forms, and how did it go on the interior architecture, whether it is there on the wall or the floor, and how would one start, from which point, and then how it would end, where would be the borders, and what are the underlying lying meanings behind these. So like this is one chauki, the apan, which is called as the swastik chauki, and here the documentation done by the student group clearly explains, so where this is the central point, this is where one begins, and then there is a 9 dot swastik over here that we see in the center, which is then expanded, and then there is this complete grid of 81 dots, and outside there is a border, and then there is one final border. So there is a complete mathematics also, it's not just aesthetics. So it talks about culture, it talks about ethos, and these art craft forms also talk about the science and the mathematics. So why would somebody start from center, and what these 9 dots connote, and what does this 81 dot grid connote. So there is a huge science behind this, and these knowledge systems and skills which were possessed by these communities, they are becoming more and more rare. So it's all the more important that we start documenting and disseminating them. In continuation, this is another documentation which was done by yet another group, another one here. So they have shown the Lakshmi Chauki and Shiva Chauki. Moving ahead, these are two documentation projects which were done by me. So they have covered the different parts of our country. If you see the left hand side, this talks about the stone crafts of India and different parts of the country, North India and South India. And since we are talking about knowledge, skills, motives, symbols, meanings, this research was particularly about narratives and narratives into space. So how do buildings speak to us? What are the stories that they tell? And how are these stories communicated through the medium of skills and craft. So how does stone craft, being a medium in all of these, you know, interior architecture styles, how do they communicate the different stories, different narratives, visual, textual, cultural and spatial, of course. So this was one very interesting project which combines all of what I have been talking about in the previous slides. This is another one. This project focused on City Palace Udaipur and documenting varied interior architecture of the palace, also the different art and craft forms, and how these forms, the knowledge and the skills by the indigenous people have enhanced the interior architecture of the palace and increased the overall experience for a user, right from the gateway to the interiors. So here this is again in continuation to the City Palace project. This is one workshop, Gopalji and his family, and we had documented how the mirror work is done, how it was done originally in, you know, palaces like City Palace or Amer Fort, and how it has transitioned and transformed today. So entire process, you know, fixing the mirror, the kinds of tools that have been used, what kinds of mirrors, colored mirrors and plain mirrors, techniques like emboss and mosaic. So all these things, they add to the experience of interior architecture. They celebrate material, they celebrate knowledge and the skills, and how all of them, when they come together, contribute to the making of a space and creating a unique experience within it. This slide is from Gujarat, and it shows varied materials, knowledge and skills, and the work done in stone, the work done in copper, bell making, terracotta, making of tiles, mirror work again, which is seen in Gujarat as well. So when we try to, you know, document all these interior architecture forms, the related art and craft forms, the associated knowledge and the skills, we get an overall holistic picture, and it is very much in harmony with nature and the indigenous communities in accordance to their lifestyle is also reflected in what is being constructed. So documentation and understanding the knowledge and skills contribute a lot in our understanding of interior architecture styles and the region where they belong to. I would like to end with these two beautiful quotes. Skills enhance our strongest attributes. People without the knowledge of their past history, origin and culture are like a tree without roots. So just a glimpse of the next module. We will discuss traditional knowledge systems and the ingenious skills of the communities. Some references. All the references are clubbed, starting from interior architecture, space making crafts, traditional knowledge systems, skills, knowledge, material and technology, concepts of space making, stone craft, paradigms of Indian architecture. These are some contributions that I have done, and all of these papers and books, they focus pretty much on what we have been discussing all through this course. Thank you. I'll see you in the next module.